Hello, welcome to New Vision TV News. I am Ruthina Sejer, broadcast from the New Vision newsroom. We'll take a look at the news around Uganda, around East Africa, around the world. And later in this bulletin, we shall take a look at our daily Pearl of Africa series and also a special report. We start off with the news around Uganda, where we look at stories making news across the country. We start off with a story that is making headlines across the country. Now, more than 10 farmers who emerged winners in last year's New Vision Best Farmers Competition arrived at Schiphol Airport, Amsterdam, in the Netherlands this morning ahead of their study tour. The farmers left on Sunday evening after the flagging of ceremony at the DFCU head offices in Kampala on Friday evening. Now, since the competition began in 2014, Augustine Mwenda, one of the judges, said winners have been able to transform their farms into training grounds, which is in line with the government's efforts towards promoting commercial farming. Joris van Bommel, the deputy head of mission at the Netherlands Embassy, commended the best farmers for their outstanding contribution in the agriculture sector. Last year, Betty Mbabazi from Isinjiro district became the first woman to win the annual competition since it started 5 years ago. Aloysius Lubega from Wakiso district and Julius Batami from Kamuli were the first and second runner-ups, respectively. Agriculture employs up to 80% of the population, contributes half of Uganda export earnings and a quarter of the country's gross domestic product. Modernizing the sector is therefore critical to reducing poverty and creating jobs, especially for women and the youth. Let's move on to Bududa district. Now, over 100,000 residents living in Bwali sub-county have called upon government to come to their rescue before landslides strike. The villages include Chisagali, Bunamwamba North, Bunamwamba Central and Bunamwamba South around the mountain Elgon. The residents want government to give them money in terms of compensation so that they can leave the risky places and look for safer alternatives of their choice. The majority are against the idea of being relocated to Bulambuli district, where the government has indicated as the alternative area for those at risk. Now, Muloni say the government has always advised them to relocate to the safer places, but the advice had proved to be so difficult to the side of the residents because they have no alternative land where they can shift to. The residents' plea comes a few weeks after the landslides on May 4th claimed lives of people in the villages of Chisagali and Bunamwamba North in Bwali sub-county. A report coming in from Bundibujo district. Now, over 5,000 residents have petitioned the Fort Portal High Court claiming part of SEMLIKI National Park. The residents allege that government evicted them from their land when gazetting the park and they have never been resettled or compensated. Cornelius Bukechura, the leader of the group, said since 1983, when they were evicted, they have been landless and others have scattered to the Democratic Republic of Congo. He says over 10 villages stretching in 3 sub-counties of Bubukwanga, Tokwe and Chisumba were affected. Bukechura said the efforts to engage officials from the Uganda Wildlife Authority have not yielded anything. Reverend Smith Tubamwenda, one of the people who were evicted, said that local leaders have not helped them and that is the reason why they had decided to run out. Tubamwenda said that since they had not been resettled, most of the claimants are still surviving on handouts from their neighboring communities where they are staying. Reverend Thomas Kamhanda, the Deputy Prime Minister of Obundijia, Bwabwamba, said they were concerned about the lives of the people who were evicted without any compensation. In Kabalore district, now there are 3 more districts that have joined efforts to save River MPANGA from drying up. The river is facing effects of population and human activities which are making it to dry up. During the MPANGA catchment management meeting held in Kamwenge district last week, the districts of Kiruhura, Ibanda and Kamwenge committed themselves to control human activities along the river so as to save it. Richard Rabuhinga, the Cavalry District Chairperson, who is also the chairperson of the MPANGA Catchment Management Plan, say that there was need to enforce bylaws and control human activities along the river. In Kayunga District and along the Uganda prisons farm, large sections of privately owned land around the river have been converted into farmlands, and when it rains, water carries soil down into the river. Agri at Hamia, the LC5 chairperson, said through the management plan, they are sensitizing people known to encroach on the riverbank. Coming up from Kayunga district now, a row has erupted between the police and the owner of the building that accommodates Chitimbwa police post in Kayunga district over non-payment of rent for the last 14 years. Samuel Biagumie, a resident of Chitimbwa who owns the building, said since 2005 the police has not paid the rent for the house. He says despite reminders, there is nothing that has been paid. He says the money has accumulated to 30 million shillings. Begumia told the New Vision that when he complained at Naguru Police Headquarters early this year, the police asked him to dig a new pit latrine as a condition to pay him. The pit latrine they had been using filled up. However, Begumia says he has no money to construct a pit latrine because he says he wanted to use part of the payment to build the pit latrine. He says officers have been using latrines in the neighborhood for the last 2 years and the neighbors are complaining. Begumia wants the Inspector General of Police, Okoth Ochola, to intervene in his case. He says the police is supposed to pay 200,000 shillings per month. This is where Region Police spokesperson Helen Butoto says the police are aware of Begumia's issue, saying that it will be sorted out very soon. News from Arua district now. A body of unidentified man was on Saturday found in a lodge in Arua district. The proprietor of a man inn, unidentified as well, said the man checked in on Thursday after paying 20,000 shillings and took keys to the room without giving his particulars. Wula said after checking in, the man went out to have a meal and returned unnoticed. The watchman of the inn, Edera, said on Friday he informed the owner to check in the registry because they thought the guest had left with the key, but no records of signing out were found. On the same day, a carpenter, Simeon Adrini, was called in to break into the room. The carpenter came the following day and the body of the guest was discovered in the room. We end the news around Uganda in Luweero district, where the police have arrested 2 men over an incident in which a 4-year-old girl was gang raped and dumped in a disused pit latrine. The victim was a nursery school pupil of J&J Primary School in Sawe village near Bombo town. According to the police, the victim, who had been admitted at Bombo Military Hospital, was missing for 3 days by the time she was found. Luweero resident District Commissioner Phoebe Namlindo said the victim could have been raped by unknown assailants who later, in order to conceal evidence, hid her in an abandoned pit latrine. The mother of the victim, Nabide, said her daughter went missing on Saturday, prompting the family members to report a case of a missing person at Indeje police station. A search was mounted, which yielded fruit on Tuesday. She said by the time her daughter was recovered, she had bruises, her private parts were bleeding, and she could hardly walk. Luweero Acting District Police Commander Rebecca Ayeta said the police had so far arrested 2 suspects. She said one of the suspects was sighted carrying the victim on a border the day she went missing. Moving on to the latest around East Africa. Let us start in Tanzania, where an alert has been issued following a confirmation of Ebola cases in Uganda. Tanzanian Minister of Health Humi Mwalimu justified the issuance of the alert basing on important interactions between the people of the 2 countries via official borders or other unofficial channels. Tanzania has not had any cases of Ebola to date. We now move into news around the world. We start off from Sudan, where the Sudanese fallen leader Omar al-Bashir was seen in public for the first time since being ousted as he was driven in an armed convoy to the prosecutor's office. The former strongman who ruled the Northeast African nation with an iron fist for 3 decades was toppled on April 11th after months of protests against his reign. From Nigeria, blast victims are receiving treatment in a hospital after a triple suicide bombing that killed at least 30 people in the northeastern Nigerian town of Kayunga. 3 bombers detonated their explosives outside a hall in Kayunga, 38 kilometers from the Borno state capital, Maiduguri, where football fans were watching a match on TV. Moving on to Hong Kong. Hong Kong democracy activist Joshua Wong called on the city's pro-Beijing leader Carrie Lam to resign after he walked free from prison on Monday as historic anti-government protests rocked the city. Wong was sent to prison in May after he lost an attempt to squash a jail sentence over the huge democracy protests he helped lead in 2014. Let's move on to Syria. Now, rocket fire has killed 12 civilians in a regime-held village in northwestern Syria. State news agency SANA has said, blaming former al-Qaeda affiliate Hayat Tahrir al-Sham for the attack. SANA said 15 people were also wounded last Sunday in the attack on al-Wadihi village south of Aleppo city, and said HTS, which controls part of Aleppo's countryside, as well as most of the neighboring Iblidi, was responsible. Now, the wounded are receiving treatment at a hospital in the regime-controlled city of Aleppo. Closing off the news around the world is a story in Venezuela, where at least 18 people were killed Sunday in a bus accident in a rural area of western Venezuela. Police said 14 deaths were reported at the scene of the incident. 33 injured were transferred to a hospital in Villa del Rosario, where 4 of them died. The accident occurred in a rural area of Zulia State, which borders Colombia. We now take a short break, but when we come back, we shall take a look at what's making news in business.